All right, now we're going to look at the role of informational interviews. Informational interviews are relevant to all phases of the job search process. They're really one of the best tools, one of the best sets of skills that you can develop. At the very beginning of the process, we talk about finding your center, about focusing yourself, about understanding yourself. And informational interviews can play a critical part in that process of learning about yourself and learning what's important to you and defining the directions in which you want to go in your job or your career or your life. You use the informational interview to gather data, to research potential careers. You use the informational interview to explore your own interests through interactions with others. Maybe there's a career that you're interested in doing. When I was interested in going into management when I was working in the corporate world, I went out and talked with with managers to get an idea of what it was like working as a manager, to understand the kind of path that they followed and the kinds of skills that they developed in order to become managers. I mean, those informational interviews were not job applications. I wasn't asking them for a job. I was genuinely trying to research a career path that interested me. So using informational interviews is a critical part of gathering data about jobs and careers that you might explore. You use informational interviews to expand your network. You go and you talk to a person who's close to you. You tell them about the kind of work that you're considering. You say, I'd like to talk with somebody about, let's say, a career in management, or I'd like to talk with somebody about a career in office administration. Do you know somebody with whom I could speak? And your friend says, yeah, sure, here's somebody, and you make the contact. We'll talk more about that. You go and speak with them, and then at the end of your conversation with them, you ask, is there anybody else you would suggest that I talk with? And that often leads to another contact and another contact. So through the process of interacting with people in informational interviews, you learn about other people who can help you in the job search process, and people who down the road you might turn out to help as well. You can use the informational interview to research job opportunities and company cultures. The more that you know about a potential job, the more that you know about a potential company or organization where you might work, the better decisions you're going to tend to be able to make. And you can use the informational interviews to research advertised positions. You can use the informational interview to research company environments and company cultures. Every organization has its own environment, has its own culture. And the culture or the work environment has a profound impact on the satisfaction that you feel and the joy that you feel in a job. If you work in a company where the culture matches closely your own values and attitudes, you're going to tend to be more successful. You're going to tend to find more satisfaction in your work than in a company where there is a mismatch between your basic values and the basic values of the company or the organization. So you use the informational interview to find out about company cultures and company environments. You use the informational interviews to learn about management styles and team structures. So if you are considering working for a particular manager, the more that you know about him or know about her, the better decisions that you can make in terms of whether or not that particular working relationship is likely to be successful for you or not. You can learn about organizational structures. You can learn who the managers are, who the hiring people are in those organizations. So you do use the informational interviews to gather that information, though typically you do not go have an informational interview with a hiring manager. Again, it's generally with a person who is more or less on the same level as you are and who's doing the work that interests you. Now, Informational interviews can open up what's called the hidden job market. In fact, the vast majority of jobs that are available out there in the marketplace are not advertised anywhere. Perhaps an organization is thinking of hiring someone, but the manager goes, well, gee, I don't want to go advertise this position and wind up with 1,000 resumes and go through those and only find 3 or 4 people who meet the kinds of qualifications that I need in my work. I'm going to hold off. I'm going to delay right now, and if the right person comes in, if I find out about the right person, I'm going to interview them, and indeed they are the right match for my company, I'm going to hire them. So they don't go out and advertise the position, but they kind of wait and see. And really the best managers, the best organizations, I think, are always on the lookout for outstanding people. And the very best organizations, if the business climate is right, will create a position that matches a particular skill set of an individual, provided that that position and that work will also benefit the company. So in these ways, a lot of the jobs that are available out there are not advertised anywhere. They're a part of the hidden job market. And when you're talking with people through the informational interview process, you get in touch with, you become aware of the jobs that are hidden out there and that might in fact be the right fit for you. So even though the primary purpose of the informational interview is not to get a job immediately, the informational interview itself can lead you to people and to organizations where you can find work, where you become the only person in effect applying for the job. And that puts you at a tremendous advantage and gives you a tremendous advantage in the job market. Okay, what's the process of conducting an informational interview? First of all, you start with identifying the individuals to interview. You very often wind up using your existing network, your existing contacts, to learn about other people who can help you in the job search process, to learn about other people whom you can interview to gather research about a job or a career or an organization. So you typically will go talk with one of your close associates. You'll be talking with them about your job search. You're going to say, well, I'm interested in working at such and such a company. By any chance, do you know anybody who works there? I'd like to do an informational interview with them to learn more about the company. And your friend goes, yeah, I happen to know somebody who works there. And then you say, well, may I use your name in contacting that person? And again, when this process is all working right, your friend says, sure, you can use my name, or they'll even call them and say, I'm going to have Mike, a friend of mine, Mike Ginevro, give you a call. He's a good guy. He has some interest in your company, and I was wondering if he could spend a half hour or so with you doing an informational interview. So you use your existing contacts to help you identify the people who can assist you in the through informational interviews. You go ahead and contact the individual. Again, you explain your background. If that person is a friend of one of your friends or somebody who knows an acquaintance of yours, make sure you get that personal connection in there, because that is going to tend to open up the opportunities for you in terms of having the informational interview. You typically ask for to meet with them for 15 to 30 minutes, maybe over coffee, maybe over lunch, maybe before work or after work, or whatever time works out for the person with whom you're talking and for you. And again, the typical time block is 15 to 30 minutes. Now, if the person says no, and that's going to happen, especially in a job market like the one that we've seen here in the Valley, in the 2008, 2012, time period. They might well say that it's just not available for an informational interview, and that's okay. If the person says no, you still thank them. Later afterwards, you send them a thank you note for talking with you, and you ask them if there is somebody with whom they would recommend that you speak with. So even if they say no, you politely thank them and then ask if there is somebody else they know with whom you could speak. And if that leads to another contact for you, that's great. If it doesn't, you still thank them. You still present yourself as a courteous, polite professional. Okay. Now, if the other person says, sure, yeah, and a lot of people really will, because basically you're asking them about their work, about their career paths. And if they love their work, then they're going to be really happy to talk about it. Whenever anybody asks me for an informational interview, I'm delighted to talk about the things that I've done because I love the things that I've done. And if it's something that I didn't like, I'm honest with people as well. I'll tell them that. But for the most part, they ask me to talk about things that I love to do, and that's a pleasure. So if the other person says yes, then you schedule an appointment. You schedule the appointment for a specific amount of time, again, typically a 15 to 30-minute block, and make sure that when you go to the informational interview that you stick to that time allotment. Okay, now, prepare. Do not just walk into the informational interview without planning your questions. Okay, make sure that you think through. Why am I? And you should be doing this even right from the beginning. Why do I want to talk with this person? What are the kinds? What's the kinds of information that I would like to gather from this person? What are the questions that go with that? And we'll look at some sample questions towards the end of this module. As a part of your planning process, prioritize your questions. These are the 3 or 4 most important questions that I want to ask this person. And these are the other ones. If I have time, I'll gather more information. I'll use those. But I want to make sure to cover these top 3 or top 4. When you go to the information, and then practice asking the questions. If you can conduct practice informational interviews with your friends or acquaintances, do that. But make sure you prepare and you've thought through what you want to accomplish in the interview and what you want to ask the person. When you go to the interview, dress appropriately, dress professionally, dress in a way that's consistent with the way people dress within the organization where you're going to do the interview. And if you're not sure, generally speaking, business casual is okay. And by the way, and I think of my son here, anytime my son goes to an interview, he is going to wear a suit and a tie and a dress shirt and be really dressed up because he loves to do that, and that's entirely the way. That's just the way that he is. And I tend to be more casual, but so I would do go in at the very least a business casual outfit. But I try to dress in a way that's appropriate for the organization where you're going to be talking with the person. Make sure that you're on time. Plan in advance. If you're taking the train, if you're taking public transportation, make sure you have the schedule straight. Catch the train that before the one that gets you there just in time, so that if there's a delay in public transportation or if you're driving, if you get caught up in traffic, that you have some time buffers. You don't want to get there late. If you can get there a little bit early, that's great. Let's see. Conduct the interview. Now, so you go in, you thank the individual for speaking with you. You ask your questions. As you go through, you monitor the time. If the allocation is a 30-minute time slot, you monitor with your watch or with looking at a clock on the wall to make sure that when 30 minutes is up, that you say, gee, this time has gone by really quickly. We had agreed to speak for 30 minutes. I really want to thank you for having this opportunity to talk with you. And if the other person at that point goes, yeah, I've got to get back to my office, you go, great, thank you so much again, and you follow up with a thank you note, and I will do the conclusion of the interview in a second. But they may well say, oh, this is interesting, because they get into the people you're talking with get into the conversation, and they may well say, well, let's talk for another few minutes. If the person with whom you're speaking says, let's talk for another few minutes, yes, by all means, continue the conversation, but don't get to the end of the conversation. Do not get to the end of the conversation or the end of the 30-minute allotment and say, well, 30 minutes has gone by right now. I've got an extra 15 minutes or so let's talk a little bit more. No, if the other person says that, the person with whom you're speaking says that, that's great. You don't say that. You don't try to force a change, because what you're demonstrating every time you interact with a person is the kinds of qualities that you have as a person. You're on time for the interview. You dress appropriately. You prepare. You're saying, I'm well organized. I prepare in advance. I plan. And when you are monitoring the time, it is, I keep my commitments. If I schedule 30 minutes with you, I hold to that time. I am a person of integrity. I keep my commitments. But if you go in and you change the interview from being about gathering information to being about getting a job right now in the organization, if you make that change, you violate that trust with the other person. If you get to the end of your 30 minutes and you say, well, let's spend another 15 minutes, so that you try to push the other person to continue speaking, you violate that trust. You violate the commitment that you made, and you undercut the possibility of any further conversation with that person. You undercut the possibility of that person being of assistance to you in your job search and in your career development. Okay. When you get to the end of the interview, last thing to do is always ask the person with whom you're speaking, the interviewee, is there any other person that you would recommend I speak with? And leave that open-ended. And the idea there is to extend your network, is to expand your range of acquaintances, because that's going to open more and more and more doors for you. Now, after the interview, you send a thank you note to the person. It might be an email, it might be a voicemail message, it might be a handwritten note, whatever you consider appropriate. Email is generally, you almost always can use email, and voicemail is okay. And in some situations, you might bring in a handwritten note. Hand signed by you, can have a real impact on a person. But no matter how you do it, make sure that you send the person, communicate to the person with whom you've spoken, your gratitude for the conversation. Okay, debrief the interview. Every time you have an encounter with someone, every time you have an interaction, every time that you have an informational interview later on, every time you have you're in a hiring interview, debrief the interview. Think through, okay, what worked? What didn't work? What can I change the next time through? Are there some other questions that I would like to ask in the future? Were the questions that I asked in this interview the right fit, or are there some questions I should cut out? Is there any, is there anything else I can do to stay in contact with this person? Is there any additional follow-up that I can do? Who are the people that the person I just talked with recommended that I get in contact with? And write down, make sure you have their names and their contact information, that you include that in your address book or your contact list. So you debrief the interview. You think what worked and what didn't work, and what are you going to change in the future. Okay, and do this in a way that is as emotionally detached as you can. This is an analytical at this point, this isn't an analytical process. This is what worked, what didn't work, and what can I do to fix things. And then move on to the next interview, or move on to the next job application, or move on to the next phone call, or move on to the next class that you're going to. Always think next. Always have a larger job search process plan that you're implementing, so that no matter what happens in any given step in the process, you always have the next step that you're going to take, so that you don't get bogged down. If things didn't go the way you want it, you don't get bogged down and depressed. Or if things really went the way you want it, you don't get so sky high that you stop executing the process. That's not going to work either. That's not the right thing to do either. You want to finish one activity, one task, and then move on to the next one, and on to the next, and to the next, and to the next. Okay, some of the kinds of questions that you might ask in an informational interview. And the left column is roughly talking about career. The right column roughly talking about a particular job environment. So now, if you're exploring careers and you're just learning about a person, you can ask them, what's your current career? What kind of work do you do from a broad career perspective? What kind of education or training did you have to prepare you for your career? Education and training on a formal level can be very important in your job and career development. In some areas, like in healthcare, you actually have to take classes and get licensed by the state in order to qualify for the positions. But for most positions, there is a combination of self-study, formal classes, on-the-job training that people go through to learn about a job, to learn about a career, and to grow their skills. So you ask the person what they did. How did you get your first job in your career? That first step is really rough because, as we all know, employers will say, I'm looking for somebody who's experienced. You don't have any experience. Then you go back. If I don't have any experience, how am I ever going to get started in this? And so you trying to understand what their first job was and how they got it can help you in understanding the transition from where you are now to where you want to be in the next step in your development. Okay, what was it like starting to work in your career? Again, remember that a job in a career path extends over many years, sometimes over a lifetime. And when you're at the very beginning of that, you might end up having to do a lot of the dirty grunt work that people in the lower, thinking hierarchically again, in the lower part of a hierarchy do to, quote, pay their dues so that they can do the better or more glamorous or more satisfying work that's a part of that career in the future. So be aware of the kinds of things that people have to do to get started in a career. How did you get from your starting position to your current position? Okay, so what was the path that you followed? And this again can help you understand what you can do to grow in a career, to grow in a job environment. Okay, you're going to also ask people about their particular job, their particular work at any given moment. And so you'd ask them, where are you currently working? What's your current organization? You'll ask them, what is it like to work in your company? Remember that the informational interview is a really valuable way to gather data about the environment and culture of a company. You can ask them what kinds of skills and qualities does your company seek in its new workers? What are the kinds of what are the skills they look for? What are the qualities? What are the personal qualities that they look for? What are the kinds of career paths that are available within your company? So that what do you need to do to grow? And how does it feel? How do you feel about your career choice at this stage of your life? And that can be a really important question to ask. Um, it gives a perspective from a person who is very, very experienced in a particular career, and a perspective that might surprise you, either in terms of they're really loving it or in terms of they're going, if I had it to do over again, this is what I would consider. And that's all of this is just data for you to help you in making decisions. And finally, the last question is always, is there anyone else you know in this area with whom I could talk? Anybody else that you recommend that I talk with? Okay, I'm going to escape here.